Hey y'all, Mr. Lopez here with some reminders, tips, and things to think about as we approach our essay number 2 due date just in a couple of weeks. Um, First, some thoughts about using in-text citations to borrow material from source material, borrow quotations or summary or paraphrase from other places, and then some general reminders about the essay itself. So first thing, what I have on this Word document are 4 examples that should fit just about any way you would have to borrow material to quote, for example, from any of your sources for essay number 2. The first two deal with paginated sources. Paginated means it's a source material that you have, a research material or a class reading that has page numbers. For example, all of our readings from our They Say, I Say textbook have page numbers, so those are paginated sources. So these two examples, number 1 and number 2, deal with sources that have page numbers. And what I want is what I'd like to have is everybody get these in-text citations perfect on essay number 2. This is a good time to, if you've been losing points on the MLA documentation segment of your rubric, this is a good time, the last major essay of the semester, to get this right. So, number 1, it says it's an example of a paginated source, and the author is listed in the signal phrase. So the example is here. Signal phrase, in essay title and quotation marks, a tax system rigged against the 99%. Author, Joseph E. Stiglitz, writes. So there's your signal phrase at the beginning of the sentence. And then you have your quotation. Research in recent years has linked the tax rates, sluggish growth, and rising inequality. The borrowed language is inside quotation marks. Most of us know that by now. And then you have a space and your in-text citation. It's a parentheses, and inside is the page number from which the quotation derives. So this is the page number from the original source. In this case, it's the They Say, I Say textbook, from which this quotation derives. And inside the quotation is the page number, period at the end. Notice you do not have the author's last name inside the page number because the author's name appears in the signal phrase, within the sentence that introduces the quotation. If you have a paginated source and the author is not in the signal phrase, for example, you have a signal phrase like this, the author writes, comma. Probably because you already used the author's name. In this case, for example, it would be Joseph Stiglitz. You've already used Stiglitz's name over and over and over again in your paragraph. And you're like, okay, if I list it one more time, it's going to sound like I'm just putting it there. It's repetitive. So I don't want to list it. I don't need it. The quotation is going to be obviously linked to Stiglitz's essay. So all I need is the author writes. That's fine. Quotation, exact same quotation as in number 1 example. Research in recent years has linked the tax rate, sluggish growth, and rising inequality, close quotation marks. Except because the author's name was not in the signal phrase, like number 1, you put the author's last name inside the quotation. So you have the author's last name, let your reader know from where does the quotation derive, along with the page number. This is where the original source is found. This is who wrote it, both inside quotation marks, period at the end. The next two, number 3 and number 4, deal with non-paginated sources. So obviously if it's in our textbook, or They Say, I Say, it's paginated. There's page numbers throughout the entire book. But we're doing research for essay number 2, just as we did with essay number 1. And lots of times when we find web sources, they're not paginated. Usually you find something that you want to use for your research to support your thesis in an essay, and you scroll down the web page, there's no page numbers. Those are non-paginated sources. Otherwise, author in or not in a signal phrase, the same rules apply. So here, however, Paul Krugman, in his essay titled The Very Strong Case for Bidenomics, argues you have a signal phrase before the quotation, you have the author and the title in the signal phrase, so then you have the quotation with no citation at the end. Even before the coronavirus, good employment numbers could hide underlying economic weakness. No citation at the end because, remember, the source does not have page numbers. and the author is already listed in the signal phrase. So there's nothing to put in the citation. Can't put a page number because the source isn't paginated. Can't put the author's name because it's already been given. It wouldn't make sense to list it twice. So in this case, you put your period inside the quotation marks, and you're done. You close the quote, period inside, that's it. If you have a non-paginated source and the author is not in the signal phrase, in other words, the author is not listed in the sentence, then that's where you put the author's last name alone inside a citation. So you have, however, even before the coronavirus, good employment numbers could hide underlying economic weakness. Close quotation marks, comma, inside quotation to separate the quotation from the signal phrase, argues the author. But notice in the signal phrase, the author is not listed. So you need to tell your reader either the page number and or where with the author, who wrote the source. There's no page number to give because the source isn't paginated. The author's not in the sentence. It's not given in the signal phrase. So you put the author's last name inside the parenthetical citation, close it, period at the end. So what I would do is use these 4 examples as just sort of models. When you have a source that's paginated and you give the author in the signal phrase, make sure your example in your body paragraph of your essay matches mine. If you have a paginated source and your author's not in the signal phrase, same thing, just check it against this model. Same thing with 3 and 4, non-paginated research materials, author in or not in the signal phrase. There's no reason to lose points if you have models provided by your instructor in a video. So I would double check these. Some general reminders, last minute reminders, as again, 2 weeks or so, a little over 2 weeks before the essay number 2 final draft is due. Remember, we are using 6 sources total, no more or less. You choose 3 of our class readings, add 3 of your own research materials, and you'll have 6 sources total. So nobody should have less than 6 sources listed on the Works Cited page. Nobody should have more. Everybody should have 6 places from which to borrow material. 3 class readings, 3 research materials, 6 total. Remember, I mean, it's obvious, but I've had people forget half of the essay. This is a problem solution essay, so don't just address the problem, don't just address the solution, you need to address both. Remember, we did those readings about the Rogerian and Toulmin models of argumentation. You need to choose one model of argumentation for this essay. It's in the essay prompt. You need to do it. It's part of the assignment. You'll lose points if you don't. You do not need to label your essay as a Rogerian argument or as a Toulmin argument. I should be able to tell if you've chosen to go the Rogerian route or the Toulmin route just by how you deal with arguments counter to your own. Very brief rundown. You can always go back to those readings in your They Say, I Say. Rogerian is where you compromise with people who disagree with you. It's the less aggressive approach. It's the one probably most of you have not really been taught until this class. A Rogerian argument says, in theory, okay, someone might argue this contrary to me, and someone might argue this contrary to me, and somebody else might say this. And there's a way forward. A little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that person. If we come to a compromise, this is the solution. And we can all work together, and that's how we get to this ultimate solution that has a little bit of everybody's voice in it. Toulmin, the Toulmin model of argumentation, is much closer, much more aligned to what you're used to, what you were taught in English 111. It's where you argue your thesis point by point, and then when you raise counter arguments in your essay, you say, however, one might argue blank, contrary to what you've been saying your whole paper. You give the person who's arguing counter to your own argument some room, be fair to them, let them say their piece, and then you argue against them. You rebut their counter argument. So Toulmin arguments are a little bit more aggressive. You address and you acknowledge other people in the room who disagree with what you're saying. You give them some room, you empathize with them, you let them say their piece, and then you argue against them. In other words, you rebut the counter arguments in those paragraphs of your paper. Don't forget, length requirement is 5 full pages. You lose a letter grade if you are even 4 3/4. You need to get down to the very bottom of page 5. My suggestion is always to spill a little bit onto page 6, just in case, just to be careful of any formatting issues. You don't want to lose a letter grade on the last major assignment of the semester before the final exam. This essay number 2, is worth 35% of the course. That is a huge chunk. So basic language mechanics, spelling, length requirement, anything that's going to lose you a lot of points on something that's worth so much, you don't want to let it happen. This is the time to push yourself. This is the time to get the grade you want in the course. In other words, if you have a D or F right now and you're staying in the course after the W date, you need to do well here to pull that grade up. The final exam is the only real major assignment left, and it's not anywhere near 35% of the course. It's only 15%. It'll really only help you jump up or down if you're borderline between grades. Essay number 2, 35%. This is the time to get your A, B, or C past the class. Lastly, you don't want to be accused of plagiarism on the last essay of the semester, major essay of the semester before the final. You don't want to 0 on something worth 35%. It automatically means you fail for the semester. So make sure when you borrow material, when you summarize, paraphrase, or quote, you document your source material. You have all these examples above, in-text citations, give your source in a signal phrase, etc. And then you need works cited entries for everything you borrow, everywhere you borrow material from. So when you borrow material, document it in your text, in your paragraph, where you summarize, paraphrase, or quote with your citation. And then works cited entries. If you have works cited entries for every place that you borrow material from, and you have in-text citations, you cannot plagiarize. It's impossible. You documented your sources. Finally, get an early start, y'all. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I'm here. Shoot me an email. If for some reason you haven't been able to make appointments with the Real Center or the ILC, essay number 2 is the chance to do it. It's the time to do it. Get as much help as possible. Even if you're confident, you've been getting A's and all that stuff. It doesn't hurt if you have the time to get some help, to get another voice on if your thesis is strong, or if your Rogerian model is obvious, or if your Toulmin model of argumentation is obvious, or if you've done a good job quoting and your in-text citations are correct. Get as much help as possible. Do a great job on essay number 2 so you don't have to sweat out the final exam. And good luck, y'all. Just a couple weeks left before this due date, so get after it. Let me know if I can help. Bye.